Thank you to the listeners who have already subscribed to our channel, and we invite new ones to subscribe for free.
Yes, welcome in.
So picture this. You are navigating the halls of a wildly powerful, incredibly paranoid ancient empire.
A very dangerous place to be.
Exactly. And you want a promotion, right? You want direct access to the king. But the absolute prerequisite for that top-level security clearance is sacrificing your biological future.
It's a brutal reality.
It really is. Today, we are breaking through a major historical taboo. We're stepping into an area of ancient history that, honestly, a lot of people just politely ignore.
Right, get swept under the rug.
But it is absolutely crucial if you want to understand how the ancient world actually functions.
It's a fascinating topic because we're looking at a group of people who are, well, entirely marginalized in some texts, yet holding the fate of massive empires in their hands and others.
Right at the start, we want to make it clear that today's entire deep dive is built on the brilliant research of historian and Professor Reuven Fangold of Hebraica of Jerusalem.
Yes, incredible foundational work.
Unbelievable depth. We are unpacking the surprisingly prominent, complex, and vital roles of eunuchs and impotent men in Jewish history.
Whoa.
We're tracing how these individuals went from being heavily restricted by ancient law to becoming high-ranking officials, intellectual powerhouses, and literal saviors of prophets.
Which, requires us to look at the foundational baseline first.
Right, the ground rules.
Exactly. Before we could even begin to understand the powerful eunuchs operating in foreign courts, we really have to look at how early Jewish law viewed bodily perfection and, well, castration.
Let's start with the terminology itself, because I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes in.
That's a good place to start. So we have the Greek word eunuchoi and its Hebrew equivalent, seris.
And this isn't some, rare, obscure word. You'll find serin over 40 times in the Bible.
Right, it's very common.
But it doesn't always strictly mean someone who is castrated or physically impotent. Right.
No, and that is a vital distinction to make for anyone diving into these texts. Over time, seris evolved in some context to mean a high office or a title.
Almost like a rank.
Exactly, regardless of the person's physical state. But when we talk about the actual physical act of castration, Judaism historically maintained an absolute, unwavering condemnation of mutilation.
No exceptions.
None. This rule applied universally to both animals and human beings.
The texts are, they're uncompromising about this. If you read the book of Leviticus, which lays out the core precepts for the people of Israel, it demands strict physical perfection.
It does.
Leviticus 22.24 establishes a very clear rule for animal offerings. It states that you cannot offer an animal with crushed, smashed, torn, or cut testicles.
Right.
You can't even accept these animals from a foreigner. They are deemed completely defective.
And that standard of physical perfection, it didn't stop with animals. It extended directly to human beings.
Particularly the priests, right?
Yes. Particularly the priests participating in the daily temple activities. To understand the ancient mindset, you have to realize that priests were considered holy men.
Right.
They had to physically reflect the perfection of the divine laws they represented.
I have to be honest, reading Leviticus 21.1.8 through 20 feels akin to reading an incredibly rigid, almost clinical, terms and conditions for holy service.
That's a very modern way to put it, but it fits perfectly.
It gives this highly specific list of physical exclusions. It mandates that anyone with a deformity is out.
It's very thorough.
It specifically lists the blind, the lame, the mutilated, those with disproportionate limbs, fractures in the hands or feet, hunchbacks, dwarfs.
People with eye spots.
Right, eye spots, scabies, dermatitis, or broken testicles.
It is a sweeping mandate, without a doubt. And it wasn't just limited to the priesthood either.
Really? It went further.
Oh, absolutely. This concept of physical wholeness reached the wider population. Deuteronomy 23.1 and 2 explicitly states that a man whose testicles are crushed or whose virile member is cut off shall not be accepted into the congregation of the Lord.
The Chol Hashem.
Exactly, the Chol Hashem.
And this harsh exclusion was heavily reinforced during the Talmudic era, too. The Talmud in Yebamot 70 states flatly that a castrated individual or one with a genital defect cannot be part of the congregation of Israel under any circumstances.
Right.
It just feels so exclusionary. It's like it strips away the human element entirely.
I completely understand why it reads that way today. But here is where the historical and religious narrative shifts.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it introduces a really profound layer of psychological understanding. The laws weren't entirely black and white forever. They evolved to incorporate deep empathy.
Oh, so.
Well, in that same Talmudic tractate, Yebamot 8.3, we find a crucial, fascinating exception. It discusses the Saras Chama.
Sarish Chama. What does that translate to?
It translates to someone who is impotent or castrated from birth.
Oh, okay. So that completely shifts the perspective. Now, we aren't talking about an intentional act of mutilation by a human hand.
Exactly.
We're talking about a condition of nature.
Yes. And the great French commentator Rashi interpreted this beautifully. He argued that impotence, or a congenital lack of development, is a pathological state.
It's outside of their control.
Right. It's an act of nature, governed by the divine, and entirely outside the individual's control.
That makes so much sense.
Because these individuals bear no fault for their physiological situation, Rashi concluded they absolutely can and should be accepted into the congregation.
What a profound relief to find that level of psychological empathy emerging in the ancient world.
It really is.
It moves away from those rigid terms and conditions and actually looks at the human being suffering. There is a poignant quote from the apocryphal book of Ben Sira 30.34 that captures this completely.
Yes, I know the one you mean.
It says, "When a eunuch embraces a girl, the heart aches seeing so much suffering."
It is a striking verse. It acknowledges the deep emotional and psychological pain of the individual.
It really shifts the gaze, doesn't it?
It does, from a legalistic judgment of physical perfection to profound human compassion. We are moving from judging the body to empathizing with the soul.
So we have the internal religious laws and debates of Israel established, but let's look at the geopolitical reality now.
Which is a whole different ballgame.
Completely, because while these internal debates about inclusion were happening, Jews were navigating massive foreign empires.
Right.
And in places like Egypt and Persia, being a eunuch was essentially an extreme security clearance for the highest echelons of power.
The geopolitical landscape flips the script entirely. In foreign courts, as we mentioned earlier, the Hebrew word saris often denoted a high court official or a powerful military commander.
We see this clearly in 2 Kings 25.1, right?
Right.
Where a saris is literally in charge of commanding the men of war.
Exactly.
Let's travel to Egypt to see how this mechanism of power actually worked. Most of you probably know this story in Genesis 37 and 39.
The story of Joseph.
Yes, Joseph is sold into slavery, and he is bought by Potiphar, the chief of Pharaoh's guard. Now, the historical hypothesis presented in our sources today offers a wild new perspective on this.
It really does. It's the proposition that Potiphar was literally a castrated eunuch.
Which changes everything about the story.
When you view the narrative through that lens, the domestic dynamics make complete sense.
Walk us through that.
Well, Potiphar gradually trusts Joseph with absolutely everything in his vast estate, his business, his house, his fields. Joseph becomes the ultimate right-hand man.
He practically runs the place.
He does. But there is only one single thing Potiphar keeps completely off limits to Joseph, his wife.
Which sets up an incredible psychological drama. If Potiphar was indeed a mutilated eunuch, incapable of achieving an erection and satisfying his wife, she would have been perpetually frustrated.
Right.
Suddenly, her aggressive advances toward the handsome, highly successful Joseph aren't just some, random plot point.
No, they are the result of a very specific, tense household dynamic.
Potiphar, despite his physical condition, still possessed natural male pride. He obviously didn't want his wife sleeping with other men.
Of course not.
So he trusted Joseph with the entire world, except her.
It takes a famous biblical narrative and grounds it in a very gritty human reality. It shows how the physical reality of being a eunuch shaped the domestic and political dynamics of the most powerful households in the ancient world.
Okay, let's move from Egypt to the deeply paranoid court of Persia, detailed in the Book of Esther.
Oh, this is a fascinating one.
We meet King Ahasuerus, a monarch noted for living in a rather constant state of intoxication.
To put it mildly.
Right, and who actually manages the most sensitive, critical aspects of his vast empire, 7 castrated eunuchs.
The text carefully lists all their names, which really shows their importance as a royal cabinet.
Do we have the names?
We do. Mehuman, Bigtha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zathar, and Carcass.
That's quite the list.
It is, and we need to understand the mechanism here. Why did ancient kings rely so heavily on these men?
Yeah, why them specifically?
Empire building was a dangerous, cutthroat business. Stripping men of their reproductive futures was a brutal but highly effective method for kings to ensure total loyalty.
Because if a high-ranking official has a family, he might plot a coup to put his own son on the throne.
Exactly. A eunuch physically cannot start a rival dynasty.
He has no biological heirs to plot for.
You hit the nail on the head. Their entire existence, their wealth, and their security were tied completely and exclusively to the current king.
That makes absolute cold-blooded sense.
They were also entrusted with protecting the absolute purity of the royal lineage. These 7 eunuchs in Persia were charged with guarding the physical and sexual integrity of the court.
Right, they were the ones ordered to bring Queen Vashti out to display her royal crown to the nobles.
And when Vashti is ultimately deposed, we meet another incredibly powerful eunuch, Haggai.
Haggai, right?
Haggai is the official who supervised all the imported virgins brought to the capital city of Susa to replace the queen. He essentially controlled the gateway to absolute power.
Which demonstrates that eunuchs were not just marginal background figures in these empires. They were the central cogs of the imperial machine.
They absolutely were.
They controlled access to the sovereign. They managed the future of the royal bloodline. Without them, the kings simply couldn't function.
Okay, so we see them as administrative guards and bureaucrats for paranoid kings. But the narrative takes another incredible turn when we look at the prophetic texts.
Right, in the books of Jeremiah and Daniel.
Eunuchs step up as dramatic saviors and intellectual giants. They are actually the heroes of the story.
The rescue of the prophet Jeremiah is one of the most vivid tactical examples of this. Let's set the scene for you.
Please do.
During the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem, Jeremiah was prophesying the city's fall, and this was severely demoralizing the defending soldiers.
Naturally.
The nobles wanted him dead, and the king effectively just looked the other way.
They didn't just execute him, though, did they?
No, they dropped Jeremiah into a cistern belonging to Prince Malchiah. Now, this cistern is empty of water, but it is filled with deep, thick mud. Awful.
Jeremiah sinks into the mire, left down there in the dark to slowly starve to death. Enter Ebed-Melech, whose name is sometimes translated as Abdulmelech.
An Ethiopian eunuch serving in the royal court.
Exactly. And Ebed-Melech takes an immense political risk here.
Huge risk.
While the king and the native nobles are perfectly willing to let the prophet die, this foreign eunuch takes the initiative. He goes directly to the king, advocates for Jeremiah, and miraculously secures permission to save him.
I love the tactical details of this rescue in Jeremiah chapters 38 and 39. Ebed-Melech doesn't just toss a rope down into the dark.
No, he's smart about it.
Very. He takes 30 men with him. He goes to the royal treasury, gathers old rags and worn-out clothes, and lowers them down to Jeremiah.
The rags were to protect him, right?
Yes. He tells Jeremiah to put the rags under his armpits so the ropes won't cut into his flesh as they drag him out of the heavy mud. It is an act of incredible tactical care and compassion from a eunuch.
It's a striking contrast to the invading forces outside the city walls, too.
Very true. Because when the Babylonians finally conquer Jerusalem, who is leading their forces? Their own eunuch commanders.
Men like Nebuchadnezzar, the chief of eunuchs, and Nergal-Sharezer, the chief mage.
Right. In fact, Jeremiah 29.2 specifically notes that eunuchs were among the elites exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon.
Which perfectly sets up the Babylonian exile and the story of the scholars of Daniel.
Oh, this is a great story.
King Nebuchadnezzar decides he wants the absolute best and brightest from his new captives to serve his empire. So he orders his chief of eunuchs, Ashpenaz, to import flawless, handsome, and highly intelligent Israelite youths for a 3-year intensive Chaldean education.
Think of this as the ancient equivalent of an elite, high-stakes university. But it's designed to strip them of their original culture and mold them into perfect, loyal, imperial servants.
Exactly. And among these youths are 4 famous Jewish eunuchs.
You probably know them as Daniel, who is renamed Belteshazzar, and Hananiah, renamed Shadrach, Mishael, renamed Meshach, and Azariah, renamed Abednego.
This brings us to the famous dietary rebellion in Daniel chapter 1. Daniel and his friends completely refuse to eat the rich, non-kosher food and wine from the royal table.
Which was danger.
Extremely. Daniel proposes a massive risk, a 10-day test where they eat only vegetables and drink only water. Now, Ashpenaz, the chief eunuch, is terrified by this proposal.
And his fear is entirely justified in a brutal empire like that. He literally tells Daniel that if the king sees them looking frail, or even just worse than the other youths eating the royal diet, the king will take his head.
Literally.
But despite the danger, he actually agrees to the 10-day trial.
And after 10 days of vegetables and water, the 4 Jewish eunuchs look healthier and better nourished than all the youths eating the royal delicacies.
It's amazing.
Furthermore, God grants them extraordinary talent and mastery of science. When the king finally examines them, He finds them 10 times superior to all the scribes and magicians in his entire realm.
It is a profound triumph. These four individuals completely dominated the intellectual landscape of the Babylonian Empire.
Think about the resilience here. These empires took absolutely everything physically from these men.
Yeah, they stripped them of their bodily autonomy.
They took away their ability to have families or leave a biological legacy. Yet Daniel and his friends completely dominated the empire intellectually.
They weaponized their minds when their bodies were compromised.
They turned their physical limitation into an opportunity for unparalleled intellectual and spiritual focus.
Wow.
Because they were unburdened by the societal expectations of building a lineage, they could dedicate themselves entirely to scholarship and statecraft.
Which brings us to the final, most moving part of our deep dive today. How did the ancient Jewish tradition ultimately reconcile the initial strict exclusion of eunuchs that we saw in Leviticus with these incredible historical contributions in Babylon and Persia?
We come full circle back to the sacred texts, specifically to the prophet Isaiah.
Isaiah provides a breathtaking theological resolution that completely upends those original strict laws.
He does. In Isaiah 56.3 through 5, there is an explicit, beautiful promise from God that proselytes and eunuchs can indeed join his people.
The verse is incredibly moving. It says, "Let not the eunuch say, 'Oh, I am but a dry tree.'"
That metaphor of the dry tree is devastatingly accurate for the ancient world.
It really is.
It perfectly encapsulates the despair of having no biological future, no branches to extend into the next generation. But God answers that despair directly.
God promises that the eunuchs who keep the Sabbath, choose what pleases him, and hold fast to his covenant will receive a reward far better than biological sons and daughters.
He promises them a monument and a name within his walls that will never perish.
The magnitude of this promise cannot be overstated. And for you listening today, it connects directly to modern history in a deeply profound way.
It does. The original Hebrew phrase used by Isaiah for a monument and a name is Yad Vashem.
Yad Vashem. That exact biblical verse, spoken to comfort the marginalized eunuchs of the ancient world, inspired the naming of the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, founded in 1953.
It is the ultimate poetic justice. A group of people who were historically and physically barred from leaving a physical legacy through children are granted the ultimate eternal promise of historical memory.
Their name will never be erased.
Never.
That gives me chills. To summarize everything we've unpacked today, eunuchs, whether they were serving in Babylon, Persia, Ethiopia, Egypt, or Israel, were often dismissed by ancient laws and societies as dry trees.
Right.
But their crucial historical role was undeniable. They were the ones ensuring that the ancient world's eternal flame of pleasure, its administration, its military strategy, and its statecraft were never extinguished.
Absolutely. And to close out the scholarly nature of our exploration today, I want to formally recite the key bibliography for you to explore these ancient sources further.
Please do.
The foundational texts we discussed are found in Genesis, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, 2 Kings, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Esther, the apocryphal book of Ben Sira, and the Talmud.
It's incredible how much history is hidden in plain sight within these texts, waiting for us to just look a little closer and understand the human mechanisms behind the rules.
It really is. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. In our modern world, we no longer have literal royal courts or eunuch guards managing our geopolitics.
Thank goodness.
Right. But how often do we still treat certain groups of people as dry trees based solely on physical differences or conditions entirely outside their control?
That's a powerful question.
And more importantly, how can we actively apply the profound psychological empathy found in the Talmud and the book of Isaiah to our society today?
Thank you very much for having been with us. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe for free to the channel, and we already invite you to follow the next episode.